My son-in-law tried to emotionally blackmail me into co-signing a mortgage for a mansion he couldn't afford, claiming I wouldn't want my grandkids growing up in a tiny apartment. He saw my grief as weakness and my savings as his inheritance. So, I made one phone call, bought the exact house in cash, and set a trap he never saw coming. Before we dive into this intense story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd also love to know where you're all tuning in from. Let us know in the comments. The call from my daughter, Emily, came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a day like any other in the year since my wife, Alina, had passed away, gray, quiet, and suffocatingly empty. The silence in the house we'd shared for 35 years had become a physical presence, a weight on my chest that made every breath an effort. I was standing in the kitchen, staring at the cheerful yellow wallpaper Alina had insisted on, her ghost still lingering in the scent of lemon polish and dried lavender. "Dad, are you there?" Emily's voice, usually bright and energetic, was thin and tight with an anxiety she was trying to conceal. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said, my own voice raspy from disuse. "Everything okay?" "Of course, yes, everything's great. Julian and I were just thinking it's been a while. We'd love to have you over for dinner on Friday. The kids miss you." The kids, Noah and Sophie, my beautiful grandchildren. It was a low blow, and she knew it. I hadn't seen them in a few weeks, my grief having become a wall that was easier to hide behind than to explain. The thought of their bright eyes and easy laughter was a pang of pure sunshine in my monochrome world, but the mention of Julian's name immediately put me on guard. My son-in-law, Julian Croft, was a man sculpted from ambition and polished to a high shine. He wore his success like one of his tailored suits, impeccably, but with a stiffness that suggested it wasn't quite comfortable. In the year since Alina's death, his attitude toward me had shifted from one of mild condescension to something more predatory. He looked at me not as his wife's grieving father, but as a depreciating asset, a vault of accumulated wealth waiting to be unlocked. "Dinner sounds nice," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "What's the occasion?" There was a pause. I could hear Julian's faint murmur in the background coaching her. "No occasion," Emily said a little too brightly. "Just family. We have some exciting news we want to share with you, something big." Big, with Julian, big was never just big. It was expensive. It was extravagant. It was always in some way about him. A weariness settled deep into my bones. I was a 58-year-old retired engineer, a man who had spent his life building bridges, both literal and metaphorical. I understood stress points, load-bearing walls, and structural integrity. The foundation of my family, once rock solid, had begun to feel unstable ever since Julian arrived, and I felt a tremor of what was to come. "Dad, Friday at 7. I looked around the kitchen at the framed photo of Alina and me on the counter, our smiles frozen in a happier time. She had never fully trusted Julian either. She'd seen the avarice behind his perfect smile, the calculation in his eyes. "Be careful, Charles," her voice echoed in my memory. "He doesn't see a family, he sees a balance sheet." But what could I do? To refuse was to push Emily further away, to cede more ground to him. For the sake of Noah and Sophie, for the fading connection to my only child, I had to walk into the lion's den. "I'll be there," I said, my heart heavy. I hung up the phone, and the silence of the house rushed back in, colder and more ominous than before. I knew this dinner wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. I went because I loved my daughter, but I never imagined the ambush they had prepared was designed to demolish the very foundations of the life Alina and I had so carefully built. Friday arrived with a sense of grim inevitability. I put on a simple sweater and slacks, the clothes of a man who has nothing to prove, and drove to the apartment complex where Emily and Julian lived. It was a perfectly nice place, clean, modern, with a small playground where I'd pushed Noah on the swings many times. It was a home, or at least it should have been. But for Julian, it was merely a stepping stone, and one he was eager to leave behind. Emily greeted me at the door, her hug feeling more like an apology than a welcome. She looked tired, the skin around her eyes strained. Behind her, Julian emerged, beaming, a drink already in his hand. "Charles, good to see you. You look rested," he said, his tone implying I did little else these days. He clapped me on the shoulder with a familiarity he hadn't earned. "Can I get you something? A scotch?" "Water is fine, Julian, thank you." The apartment was filled with the aroma of roasted sea. Hicken, a meal I knew Emily had made because Julian considered cooking to be beneath him. My grandchildren, Noah and Sophie, came running out to give me fierce hugs around my knees, and for a moment the tension in my chest eased. Their unconditional love was the only currency that still held any value. "Grandpa, are you going to stay and read me a story tonight?" Sophie asked, her big brown eyes so like her mother's, looking up at me. "We'll see, sweetie," I said, stroking her hair. Julian chuckled. "Sophie, Grandpa has important adult things to talk about with Mommy and me tonight. Big things." He winked at me, as if we were co-conspirators in some grand venture. I just gave him a thin smile. Dinner was a carefully choreographed performance. Julian dominated the conversation, talking about market trends, a recent golf game with some heavy-hitter client, and the limitations of their current living situation. He spoke of their two-bedroom apartment as if it were a Victorian slum. "I mean, look at this place," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "The kids are practically sharing a room, and the school district it's fine for now, but they deserve the best. Don't you agree, Charles?" He was laying the groundwork, brick by heavy, obvious brick. Emily just picked at her food, her eyes darting between her husband and me. She was a passenger in her own life, and Julian had his hands firmly on the wheel. After the plates were cleared and the kids were shunted off to their room with a tablet, Julian leaned forward, his expression turning serious. This was it, the main event. "Charles," he began, his voice dropping to a confidential tone, "Emily and I are at a turning point. We're ready to make a move, a real move for the family." He slid a glossy brochure across the table. On the cover was a house that was less a home and more a corporate retreat. It was a sprawling, six-bedroom monstrosity of stone and glass, with a three-car garage and a pool that looked bigger than their entire apartment. "It's on Silverwood Lane," he said, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "It's our dream house, the perfect place for Noah and Sophie to grow up. Big backyard, top-rated schools, everything they could ever want." I stared at the pictures, the mind of an engineer, automatically calculating square footage, heating costs, property taxes. The numbers were astronomical. "It's a beautiful house, Julian," I said carefully. "It's more than beautiful, it's a statement," he corrected. "It's the kind of stability our family needs. The thing is, we've hit a small snag with the bank. My income is commission-based, you know how they are. A little unpredictable. We qualify for the loan, but they're asking for a cosigner. Just a formality, really." He finally said it. The words hung in the air, thick and toxic. Emily stared at her hands, refusing to meet my eyes. "You want me to co-sign your mortgage," I stated, not as a question. "It's the only way we can get our dream house," Julian pressed, leaning in. His voice softened, dripping with false sympathy. "Look, Charles, I know things have been quiet for you since a leaner passed. You're sitting on all these assets, that big empty house. This is a chance to put that money to work, to build a legacy. You wouldn't want your grandkids to grow up in this tiny apartment, would you? You wouldn't want to deny them this future." The emotional blackmail was so blatant, so shamelessly deployed, that it almost took my breath away. He was using my grandchildren, my love for them, as a crowbar to pry open my bank account. He was using my grief as a justification, framing my quiet life as a wasted opportunity. The disrespect was a physical blow. I looked from Julian's smug, expectant face to Emily's downcast one. She was complicit in this, letting him use her and our children as shields. The hurt was sharp and deep. But as I sat there absorbing the impact of their betrayal, a cold, clear thought cut through the fog of my sorrow. It was a familiar thought, one that had served me well for my entire career. He saw an old man, lost in grief. He forgot he was talking to an engineer. An engineer doesn't just see a picture, he sees the blueprint. He understands that a beautiful facade can hide a fatally flawed structure. I folded my hands on the table and met his gaze. "I'll have to think about it," I said, my voice level and calm, betraying none of the storm raging within me. Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, surprised I hadn't capitulated immediately, but he recovered quickly. Of course. Take your time, just not too much time. An offer like this won't stay on the market for long." I knew then what I had to do. The betrayal was worse than the request itself. It demanded not a response but a reaction, a structural correction. Driving home from that dinner, the quiet hum of my car's engine was a stark contrast to the cacophony in my head. Each of Julian's words echoed, a testament to his staggering arrogance. He hadn't just asked for a signature, he had presented me with a bill for his own ambitions, assuming I would pay it without question. My mind drifted back through the years, to the sacrifices Alina and I had made. I wasn't born into wealth. I had built my engineering firm from the ground up, with a second-hand drafting table in a rented room and a loan from a bank that barely believed in me. I remembered the 80-hour work weeks, the nights spent poring over blueprints until my eyes burned, the weekends I'd missed with Emily when she was little because a project deadline was looming. Alina was the bedrock of it all. She managed our home, our budget, and our lives with a quiet efficiency that made my success possible. We lived modestly, even when the money started coming in. We didn't buy flashy cars or take extravagant vacations. We invested. We saved. We paid off our mortgage in 15 years. We put every spare dollar into Emily's college fund and our retirement. The wealth I had was not a windfall. It was a fortress built brick by brick over a lifetime of discipline and hard work, meant to protect our family for generations. And Julian saw it as his personal slush fund. My son-in-law was the epitome of a new breed of professional I could never understand. He didn't build things, he leveraged assets. He didn't create value, he optimized portfolios. He worked as an investment advisor, a title that sounded impressive but as far as I could tell, meant he was a glorified salesman, churning clients, money to generate commissions for himself. His professional life, like his personal one, was built on image, not substance. His condescension toward me had always been there, a subtle undercurrent in our conversations. He'd pat me on the shoulder and call me old-timer, making jokes about my flip phone or my preference for reading physical newspapers. He'd listen to stories of my career with a look of polite boredom, as if building bridges and power plants was a quaint, dusty hobby compared to his dynamic world of stocks and bonds. Since Alina's passing, that condescension had curdled into something uglier. He saw my grief not as a wound to be handled with care, but as a weakness to be exploited. He'd talk about unlocking the potential of my estate as if I were already gone, as if the house Alina and I had filled with love and memories was just another line item on a spreadsheet. He saw an old man, adrift and purposeless, a dragon sleeping on a hoard of gold, just waiting for a brave, clever knight like him to come and claim it. What hurt most, though, was Emily's role in all of it. My daughter, the girl I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with her calculus homework, had stood by silently while her husband tried to fleece me. I knew she was caught in his orbit, dazzled by the future he promised, a future of status and luxury that stood in stark contrast to the quiet, comfortable stability of her own upbringing. Julian had convinced her that the life her mother and I had provided was somehow not enough, that happiness could only be found in a 6-bedroom mansion with a 3-car garage. She wanted to believe in his dream. I understood that, but to let him use her and our children as emotional cudgels against her own father, that was a betrayal that cut deeper than any financial request ever could. She had chosen his glittering promises over the quiet, steadfast love that had been the foundation of her entire life. As I pulled into my own driveway, the familiar silhouette of my home, solid, unpretentious, and paid for, seemed to stand in judgment of the flimsy, leveraged future Julian was trying to build. He thought my quietness was resignation. He thought my grief was an opportunity. He had forgotten one crucial thing, the lesson I had learned over decades of turning abstract ideas into concrete reality. Before you build something new, you must first have a perfect understanding of the existing terrain. And that night, I was going to become an expert on the landscape of Julian Croft's reckless ambition. The moment I stepped inside my house, the fog of hurt and anger began to dissipate, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of purpose. I walked past the living room, past the comfortable armchair where I'd spent so many nights lost in memories, and went straight to my study. It was a room Alina had always called my command center, the one place where the chaos of the world could be ordered by logic and reason. I sat down at the heavy oak desk, its surface scarred with the history of 100 solved problems, and powered on my laptop. The familiar glow of the screen was comforting. Julian saw me as a relic from a bygone era, a man who didn't understand the modern world of high finance. But engineering is, at its core, the practice of applied mathematics. It's about risk assessment, stress testing, and identifying points of failure before they bring the whole structure crashing down. And I was about to run a full diagnostic on Julian's dream. First, I found the real estate listing for the house on Silverwood Lane. The asking price was even higher than I'd imagined. It was a staggering sum, one that would be a stretch for a surgeon or a law firm partner, let alone a commission-based salesman and a part-time graphic designer. My analytical mind took over. This was no longer a family matter, it was a feasibility study. I opened a spreadsheet, the digital equivalent of my old graph paper, and began to build a model. Line 1, mortgage. Using an online calculator, I entered the sale price, a likely interest rate, and a 30-year term. The resulting monthly payment was breathtaking. It was more than their current rent by a factor of 3. Line 2, property taxes. I went to the county assessor's website. The taxes on a property of that value in that exclusive district were ruinous. Annually, they amounted to more than Emily's entire part-time salary. Line 3, homeowner's insurance. A quick estimate from my own provider's website for a house of that size and value produced another shocking figure. Line 4, HOA fees. Exclusive neighborhoods like Silverwood Lane always had homeowner associations with steep monthly fees to cover landscaping, security, and clubhouse maintenance. I found their website. The fee was non-negotiable and substantial. Line 5, utilities and maintenance. I estimated the cost of heating and cooling over 5,000 square feet of living space, plus pool maintenance, lawn care, and the inevitable repairs that come with any home. I used conservative figures based on my own experience. When I was done, I created a final cell and summed the columns. The number that appeared on the screen was a death sentence. The total monthly cost of owning that house was nearly 70% of Julian and Emily's estimated combined income. They wouldn't just be house poor, they would be destitute. They would be forced to default within a year, perhaps even sooner. And as the cosigner, the bank would come for me. They would drain my retirement accounts, put a lien on my home, and dismantle the fortress of security I had spent a lifetime building. It all became chillingly clear. This wasn't a snag with the bank. This was a calculated deception. Julian knew they couldn't afford the house. He never intended to. He was counting on me to be his safety net. He expected me to cover the shortfalls, to pay for repairs, to subsidize his fantasy. My role was not to cosign. It was to finance. He wasn't asking for my help. He was staging a hostile takeover of my future. A cold rage, clean and pure, settled over me. This was not just about money. It was about the utter contempt he had for me, for Eleanor's memory, and for the well-being of his own family, whom he was willing to drive into financial ruin for the sake of appearances. My decision was no longer about whether to say no. A simple refusal wouldn't teach him anything. It would just make me the villain in Emily's eyes, the unsupportive father who had stood in the way of their dreams. No, the lesson needed to be more elegant. It needed to be structural. It needed to be permanent. I picked up the phone and looked at the clock. It was just after 9 a.m. I called the number for my wealth manager, a sharp young man named David who had taken over my portfolio a few years ago. "Charles, good to hear from you," he said cheerfully. "What can I do for you today?" "David," I said, my voice steady and firm, "I need to liquidate some assets. I'm buying a house. I'll be making a cash offer this afternoon." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end of the line. "Oh, wow, Charles, that's fantastic news. Congratulations. Is it a vacation home?" "No, David," I said, looking at the picture of the six-bedroom monstrosity on my screen. "It's a primary residence. I'm moving." My plan was no longer a trap. It was a rescue mission. I was going to save my daughter and my grandchildren from the man who was supposed to protect them, and I was going to do it using the very tool he had tried to turn against me. The next 48 hours moved with the swift, quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine. I contacted a top real estate agent, a woman known for her aggressive tactics and discretion. When I explained that I was a cash buyer looking to close immediately on a specific property, her entire demeanor shifted. I was no longer just another client. I was a priority. She confirmed my financial standing with David, and by lunchtime, a formal offer was presented to the sellers of the house on Silverwood Lane. A cash offer for the full asking price, with no contingencies and a promise to close in less than a week. In the current market, it was the equivalent of a royal flush. They accepted before the end of the business day. While the paperwork was being drawn up, the inevitable call came. It was Julian. His voice, usually so smooth and confident, had a sharp, impatient edge. "Charles," he said, skipping the pleasantries, "Emily is getting anxious. We haven't heard from you. The sellers have another offer. We need to move now. Have you come to your senses?" I leaned back in my chair in my study, the preliminary purchase agreement sitting on the desk in front of me. The first phase of my plan was complete. Now it was time for the second, reconnaissance. I needed to see just how deep his deception ran. "I'm still thinking, Julian," I said calmly. "It's a significant financial commitment. I was running some numbers last night." "Numbers? What numbers?" he scoffed. "Charles, this isn't an engineering problem. It's a lifestyle upgrade. The bank approved the loan with your signature. That's the only number that matters. It's a slam dunk." There it was, the lie, bald and unblinking. The bank had not approved the loan. They had merely outlined the conditions under which they would approve it. The most significant condition being my signature, my assets, my flawless credit history. He was intentionally misrepresenting the situation to pressure me. "I was just looking at the ancillary costs," I continued, my tone one of innocent inquiry. "For instance, the property tax. I did some calculations, and it seems the annual tax bill alone is more than Emily makes in a year. Did you account for that in your budget?" There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I had thrown a wrench into his smooth-talking machinery. He was prepared for emotional arguments, for pleading, for anger. He was not prepared for data. That's just a detail," he finally stammered, his composure cracking. "Those things are flexible. You can appeal them or whatever. You're getting bogged down in the weeds, Charles. You're losing sight of the big picture. The important thing is securing the house." "And the HOA fees," I pressed on gently. "They're quite substantial, nearly $500 a month. That's a car payment." "It's for the security, the clubhouse. It adds value," he sputtered, his voice rising in frustration. "Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to sabotage this for us? I thought you loved your daughter, your grandkids." He had reverted to his only real weapon, emotional manipulation, but its power was gone. I had seen the flawed blueprint, and his attempts to paint over the cracks were now just pathetic. I had all the confirmation I needed. He had done zero due diligence. He was financially illiterate, blinded by ambition, and perfectly willing to drown his family in debt as long as he looked successful on the surface. "I'm not trying to sabotage anything, Julian," I said, and my voice was so cold and steady it surprised even me. "I'm just trying to understand the full scope of the commitment you're asking me to make." "There's nothing to understand, just sign the papers," he nearly shouted. "I need more time to think," I said. "This is a bigger decision than you realize." I could hear him take a sharp, angry breath, about to unload a fresh volley of insults or threats. I hung up the phone before he had the chance. The confrontation was short, but it had revealed everything. His polished facade was paper-thin, and underneath it was a desperate, reckless gambler who was in way over his head. My resolve, which had been forged in anger, was now tempered into steel. Buying that house was no longer just a lesson for Julian. It was a firewall. I was building a barrier to protect my family from the fire of his destructive ambition, and I would spare no expense to make sure it was impenetrable. Julian, realizing he was losing control, deployed his last resort, my daughter. The next evening, Emily called me, her voice trembling with unshed tears. "Dad, Julian told me what you said. About the taxes, the fees, why are you doing this?" she whispered, and the sound of her pain was a knife in my gut. "Emily, I was just asking questions," I said softly. "It's a lot of money for all of us." "But you have the money," she cried, and I could hear Julian's arguments parroted in her voice. "It's just sitting there. Dad, this is our one chance to have the life we've always wanted, for Noah and Sophie. Julian found our dream home. He worked so hard, and you're picking it apart with a calculator. Don't you believe in him? Don't you believe in us?" The "we" and "us" hurt the most. She had so completely intertwined her identity with his that she couldn't see where his reckless fantasy ended and her family's well-being began. "Sweetheart, my belief in you has nothing to do with this house," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "My job as your father is to protect you, and I have serious concerns that this mortgage would hurt you, not help you." "You're trying to control me," she sobbed. "Just like you always do. You think I can't make my own decisions. Julian says you're just bitter and lonely since Mom died, and you don't want anyone else to be happy." The cruelty of that last line, fed to her by her husband, was stunning. It was a direct assault, designed to wound me in the most vulnerable place. For a moment, I felt the foundations of my resolve shake. Was I doing the right thing? Was this elaborate, vengeful plan really necessary? Maybe I should just say no and weather the storm of their anger. Then I pictured it. I pictured them in that house a few months down the road. I saw the panic in Emily's eyes as the bills piled up. I saw Julian, his charm gone, turning his frustration and failure on her. I saw my grandchildren caught in the crossfire of financial stress and marital strife. My grief for Alina was real, but Julian was wrong. It didn't make me bitter. It had given me a painful clarity about what was truly important, not houses or assets, but peace and security. The very things he was threatening to destroy. My resolve hardened once more. I had to see this through. Not for revenge, not anymore, but for her, for them. "Emily," I said, my voice firm but full of a love I hoped she could still hear. "I have not made my final decision yet, but I will make it soon. I want us all to sit down and talk about it together, here, at my house. Can you come over tomorrow evening, you and Julian?" There was a sniffle, then a hesitant, "Okay, Dad." "I love you, Emily," I said. "I love you too," she whispered, but it sounded more like a confession of guilt than a statement of fact. The next day was a blur of activity. I met with my lawyer to review the final purchase documents for the house on Silverwood Lane. He was a shrewd, old-school attorney named Sam who had handled my business and personal affairs for decades. He looked at me over the top of his glasses as I signed the last page. Charles, I've known you for 30 years, he said, his voice a low rumble. You're the most meticulous, non-impulsive man I've ever met. This is out of character. You're sure about this? I slid a piece of paper across his desk. It was my spreadsheet, the one detailing the financial ruin Julian was planning for my daughter. Sam studied it for a long moment, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. He let out a low whistle. "The boy's a fool," he muttered. "A greedy, dangerous fool. He's not just asking you to co-sign, he's asking you to be his personal bank." "I know," I said. Sam leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. He looked from the spreadsheet to the signed deed. "I see. This isn't an impulse buy, it's a chess move." "It's the only move he's left me," I replied. "Well," Sam said, tapping the deed with his finger, "checkmate." That evening, as I waited for them to arrive, I set the stage. On the polished surface of the dining room table, the same table where we had celebrated so many of Emily's birthdays, I placed a single, sealed manila envelope. Inside was the irrefutable proof, the final piece of my case, the notarized, officially recorded deed to 125 Silverwood Lane. My name, Charles A. Vance, was clearly printed under the heading Grantee. The trap was set. The case was built. All that was left was for the guilty party to walk in and pronounce his own sentence. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and opened the door. Julian and Emily stood on the porch. Emily looked pale and nervous, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Julian, however, was a picture of smug confidence. He was dressed in an expensive-looking blazer, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He clearly believed my summons was a sign of surrender, that my thinking had led me to the conclusion he desired. "Charles," he said, striding past me into the foyer as if he owned the place. "Good evening. I'm glad you decided to be reasonable about this." "Julian, Emily, please come in. Let's sit in the dining room," I said, my voice betraying nothing of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. We took our seats at the heavy oak table, the very heart of the home Alina and I had built. The empty chair where she always sat felt like a silent observer. Julian placed his leather briefcase on the table with a theatrical thud. "All right, let's not drag this out," he said, clicking the latches open. "I've brought the final loan commitment papers from the bank. All they need is your signature on the cosigner line, right here." He pushed a thick stack of documents toward me, a pen resting expectantly on top. I didn't look at the papers. Instead, I folded my hands and looked directly at him. "Julian, before we do anything, I want to say something." He leaned back with a sigh of exaggerated patience. "Fine, Charles, get it off your chest." "After our dinner the other night, I did what you asked. I thought about it. I thought about it very carefully," I began. "I thought about Emily and Noah and Sophie. I thought about what it means to provide a family with security and stability." Emily looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Julian's smirk widened. He thought this was my preamble to capitulation. "And I have made my decision," I continued. "I will not be co-signing your mortgage." The smirk vanished from Julian's face, replaced by a flash of disbelief, then pure fury. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What?" Julian snarled, leaning forward. "What are you talking about? After all that, after you got Emily's hopes up, you can't back out now." "My decision is final," I said, my voice as solid as granite. "In fact, it would be impossible for me to co-sign now, even if I wanted to." "Impossible? Why impossible?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Are you trying to tell me you suddenly don't have the money? Don't lie to me, Charles." "Oh, the money is not the issue," I said calmly. I slowly reached for the manila envelope in the center of the table. "It's impossible because I have a conflict of interest." I slid the envelope across the table toward him. He stared at it, confused. "What is this?" "Open it," I said. With trembling, angry fingers, he ripped open the seal and pulled out the contents. He stared at the document, his brow furrowed in confusion. He read it once, then again, his eyes widening in horror as comprehension dawned. He looked up at me, his face a mask of utter shock. This can't be real," he whispered. "This is a joke." Emily leaned over, her eyes scanning the paper. "What is it? Dad, what did you do?" "I bought the house, Emily," I said gently. "The house on Silverwood Lane. The sale was finalized this afternoon. I'm the new owner." For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Julian's face contorted, the handsome, polished mask dissolving to reveal the raw, ugly greed beneath. You what?" he finally exploded, slamming his fist on the table so hard the water glasses rattled. "You bought it, our house. How could you? How dare you?" "It was never your house, Julian," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You couldn't afford it. You were planning to bankrupt yourself, my daughter, and me along with you." "That was ours," he screamed, his face turning a blotchy red. He was completely unhinged, all pretense of civility gone. "That was supposed to be our future. That money you used, that was for EMILY. That was our inheritance." The final, fatal word hung in the air between us, poisonous and irrefutable. Our inheritance. He had said it. He had confessed in his rage the core of his entire worldview. He didn't see me as a father-in-law. He saw me as a temporary custodian of his future wealth. I saw the blood drain from Emily's face. She stared at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. The man she loved, the man she had defended, had just admitted in the ugliest possible way that he had been waiting for me to die so he could get his hands on my money. The illusion she had clung to for so long was shattered in an instant, broken by the sheer force of his greed. She slowly turned her head and looked at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, devastating understanding. The hope, the anger, the confusion, it all melted away, replaced by a look of profound shame and regret. "Stop it, Julian," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but it cut through his tirade like a surgeon's scalpel. "Just stop." He turned on her. "Don't you dare take his side. He stole our dream." "It wasn't a dream, Julian," she said, her voice gaining strength. She stood up, her back straight, her gaze unwavering. "It was a lie. My father was right. It's over." The finality in her voice silenced him. The showdown was over. The truth, in all its ugliness, had been exposed in the quiet of my dining room, and the life they had known was irrevocably broken. Julian stared at Emily, his mouth agape, utterly defeated by her sudden and absolute defection. Without another word, he snatched his briefcase from the table, spun on his heel, and stormed out of the house, slamming the front door so hard a picture frame rattled on the wall. The silence he left in his wake was heavier than any of his shouts had been. Emily stood frozen for a moment, then her composure crumbled. She sank back into her chair, buried her face in her hands, and began to sob, deep, wrenching sobs of disillusionment and shame. I moved from my chair and knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't say anything. I just stayed there, a silent, steady presence, letting her grieve the man she thought she had married and the future she thought she wanted. When her tears finally subsided, she looked up at me, her face blotchy and her eyes full of a pain that mirrored my own from the past year. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I was so stupid. I believed him. I let him turn me against you." "He was very convincing," I said softly. "You wanted to believe in a beautiful dream. There's no shame in that." "But I hurt you," she said, fresh tears welling. "What he said about Mom, I never should have repeated that." "That wasn't you talking, Emily. That was him," I assured her. "We're okay. We'll be okay." That night was the beginning of a long, difficult road. Emily went home and packed a bag for herself and the children. Their separation was swift and messy, with Julian's true colors becoming even more apparent when lawyers got involved. He fought her over every single asset, his greed now laid bare for all to see. A few weeks later, I moved out of the home Alina and I had shared, the walls now too saturated with memories, both good and bad. I moved into the cold, cavernous house on Silverwood Lane. The first few months were brutal. The victory felt entirely hollow. The 6 bedrooms, soaring ceilings, and echoing hallways only amplified my loneliness. I was the king of a castle I had conquered, but my kingdom was empty. I would sit in the massive great room, staring out at the pristine swimming pool, and feel nothing but the profound weight of my solitude. My grand gesture of protection felt like a self-inflicted punishment. But then slowly, things began to change. Emily, having found a small, new apartment for herself and the kids, started to visit. At first, it was just for an hour or two on a Saturday. The kids, Noah and Sophie, were in awe of the massive house. They called it Grandpa's Castle. Their laughter as they ran through the echoing halls began to chip away at the oppressive silence. One afternoon, I was in the 3-car garage, staring at the empty space when Noah came in. "What are you doing, Grandpa?" he asked. "Just thinking," I said. "This would be a cool place for a workshop," he said, his 8-year-old mind seeing potential where I only saw emptiness. The next weekend, he and I went to the hardware store. We bought pegboards, tools, and a long workbench. We spent the day organizing wrenches and screwdrivers, a simple, tangible task that felt more meaningful than anything I had done in years. I started showing him the basics of how things worked, the simple engineering principles that govern the world. His eyes would light up with understanding, and in them I saw a flicker of my own younger self. Sophie discovered the overgrown patch behind the pool. "Grandma Alina loved gardening, didn't she?" she asked me one day. My heart ached at the mention of her name, but it was a sweet ache, not a bitter one. "She did," I said. "She could make anything grow." So we started a garden. We tilled the soil, planted seeds, and watered them every day. We planted tomatoes, cucumbers, and a whole bed of yellow roses, Alina's favorite. As the first green shoots pushed their way through the dark earth, it felt like life was finally returning not just to the garden, but to me. The house on Silverwood Lane, once a symbol of Julian's greed and my own cold revenge, was slowly being transformed. It was becoming a home, not the one he had envisioned, built on debt and deceit, but a real one built on forgiveness, second chances, and the simple joy of watching your grandchildren chase each other across a lawn you know is safe. My relationship with Emily healed not to what it was before, but to something new, something stronger, forged in the fires of a shared crisis. She saw me not just as her father, but as her protector, the man who had been willing to look like the villain to save her from a monster. One sunny afternoon, I was sitting on the back patio, watching Noah and Sophie splash in the pool. Emily sat beside me, a cup of tea in her hands, a look of quiet peace on her face. "You know," she said softly, "I hated this house at first. It felt like a monument to how wrong I was." "I know," I said. "For a while I hated it too. But now," she trailed off, watching her children laugh, "now it just feels like home. You gave them the childhood you always wanted for me. Safe, stable." I looked out at the sprawling green lawn, at the workshop in the garage, at the budding rose bushes. I had bought the house to teach my son-in-law a lesson, but in the end, I was the one who had been schooled. I had learned that a home isn't made of stone and glass, but of the moments you build inside it. I had found a new purpose, not as a grieving widower or a guardian of assets, but as the quiet, steady engineer of my family's second chance. And in the warm afternoon sun, surrounded by the laughter of my grandchildren, I finally felt at peace.